and today I have for you Halloween true crime case, and I'll also be doing my makeup at the same time, so I want you to give me your suggestions as to what do you want me to translate next into the comment section down below. Katherine Lillian Armstrong never made it to choir practice on Halloween night. Today we are talking about the Newcastle Halloween murder. Katherine Lillian Armstrong, at the time of the event of today's case, was 70 years old. Sadly, I wasn't able to find out her date of birth, but if you do know it, then let me know in the comment section down below. Katherine was often known by her middle name Lillian. She was your classic school teacher, a very proud and independent woman, as seemed to be the standard for that generation. Katherine was known as a spinster. She has never married and lived alone all her life in Doncaster House in Sandyford, Newcastle, what was in 1963 the corner property of Goldspink Lane and the current number 12. In 1957, she retired from her job as a headmistress at the city's Denton Road Junior School. Although Katherine never married and she lived alone, she did have a close relationship with her family, in particular her cousin Ada Ridley, who lived nearby. Ada would always visit her, and at times she was quite concerned that Katherine lived alone, where she did. Ada told her a lot of times to just move out of her big, dark and gloomy house into a flat near her, but Katherine, being the independent woman that she was, she said she's not scared to live alone. After her retirement from schooling, her life seemed to revolve around the Central Methodist Church on Newcastle's Northumberland Road, where, as a devout Methodist, she had been a part of the congregation for more than 40 years and was an active part of the choir for the same length of time. Most of Katherine's routine revolved around her church, where she had regular choir practice at 7:30 p.m. every Thursday night. Katherine was always an early riser, and she would always open up her curtains on a daily basis to let the light in the house. On Thursday, October 31st, 1963, Halloween, Katherine was last seen by two children who saw her looking out of her window at around 6:30 p.m. She never made it to choir practice that evening, and of course this would have been quite unusual for Katherine, as this was her social life, going to choir every Thursday night, and this night was really no different, but Katherine never turned up that night. The next morning at 10:30 a.m., Katherine's cousin, who lived nearby, Ada, went to visit her. Ada became quite concerned when there was no answer at the door, although she had knocked several times, especially because Katherine was an early riser and she would have answered the door by then. Also, something that Ada found quite strange was that all of the curtains were closed. She had a feeling that something was not quite right. Maybe Katherine was ill, something might have happened to her, so she decided at this point to actually call the police. When officers arrived, they had to force their way into Katherine's house. Once inside, they found Katherine's body near the bottom of the stairs. She was fully clothed, wearing a dress and carpet slippers, and she also had a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. Her face and neck were also heavily bloodstained. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that Katherine had fought back against her attacker, and it was theorized that she might have fought so fiercely that she made her attacker bleed. Blood was found throughout the entire house. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing seemed to have been taken from the house. There was no murder weapon found at the scene, and no fingerprints or footprints either. The autopsy revealed that even though Katherine had the stocking around her neck, she didn't actually die of strangulation. Katherine was stabbed 28 times to her face and neck, and she died because of shock and also the blood loss from being brutally battered and also stabbed. The murder weapon was believed to have been a long-bladed instrument of some kind, and also the autopsy didn't indicate that Katherine had been assaulted, so this wouldn't really have been a motive for murder. Police started an investigation and they were trying to find a motive for this frenzied attack on Katherine. Police had no clear motive and no suspects, and they didn't even know where to begin investigating this case. Thinking that this was going to be a massive inquiry, all police holiday was cancelled and those already on holiday were recalled to assist in the investigation. A team of 60 detectives were working on this case. The search got underway for the murder weapon. They were trying to find the murder weapon. Police worked on the theory that the killer would have discarded the weapon after leaving the scene. They searched through all bins, drains and grates in the area. Parks, streams and gardens were searched for the murder weapon, but nothing was found. Meanwhile, house-to-house inquiries got underway, with police revealing that they planned to speak to more than 5,000 households in the biggest house-to-house inquiry that Newcastle had ever seen. By November the 4th, just 3 days after the murder, police had taken more than 200 statements and detectives were still halfway through the task of knocking on every door within half-a-mile radius of the murder scene. But not one person spoken to claimed to have seen or heard anything suspicious, and with still no suspects or a motive, by this time, Scotland Yard had been called in. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner sent Detective Superintendent Eric Reid from the Scotland Yard Murder Squad to oversee the investigation, and Eric asked for help from the press in an appeal for witnesses and information. In an interview at the time with the Newcastle Evening Chronicle, he revealed that there was no sign of forced entry to the property, and it was considered possible that Katherine knew her killer. He revealed that police were considering the possibility that more than one person could have been involved in Katherine's murder, and they were considering teenagers as being connected, as well as studying the files of known older male criminals who had served prison sentences for crimes of violence against older women. Plans were made for police to set up a base at St. Barnabas Church Hall in Sandyford. Detective Superintendent Reid told the Chronicle, quote, "It's going to be a long, hard slog and it will be better to be on the spot," end of quote. The main focus of the investigation saw detectives trying to piece together the last hours of Katherine's life. They had a window of around 18 hours to try and fill in. Katherine had last been seen at about 6:30 p.m. the previous evening, where two children passing by the house spotted her looking out of the window. She was expected at choir practice just an hour later, but she never arrived there. Is it possible that she was already dead by this time? By the end of November, 50 detectives were still searching for her killer in an 18-hour working day, and by the time the inquest was held into her death at the end of January 1964, police had spoken to more than 16,000 people in the area, including the murderer of another local woman. The man was from South Shields, and he was the prime suspect in the unsolved murder of 71-year-old Amy Barrett, who was found battered to death in Churchill Street off Newcastle's Scotswood Road a year earlier. Connections to this murder were later ruled out. Ada, Katherine's cousin, also believed that there was more than one suspect of this attack. She believed that her cousin was killed by teenagers who entered her home as a Halloween prank before being disturbed. Ada also said that she was worried about Katherine living alone and begged her to move closer to the rest of the family, but the investigation had still drawn a blank, and Katherine's murder sadly remains unsolved to this day. Her killer could be walking among us today. There is a strange ending to this story. Katherine's house stood empty for a few years, and by 1973 new tenants moved in after the family who lived there before them left in a hurry, having only lived there for a couple of months. According to the new tenant, the previous tenants left because the house was allegedly haunted. Mrs. Joanne Black, the new tenant, told the Chronicle at the time, "The family who were here before said the place had a ghost and was spooky. They had sensed a presence and more than once had claimed to have seen a figure stood watching out of the corner of their eye, but that there was no one there when they turned. We don't believe it is true, although the first lodger we had was convinced there was something unusual about the place. He was always at the bottom of the stairs." End of quote. Well, Katherine was found at the bottom of the stairs. So could modern day detectives solve this case? The Chronicle asked a retired Northumbria police detective to have a look at the case. Nigel Wilkinson, who has 30 years experience as a police officer, said that if evidence was preserved, this case could still be cracked. If the case would have happened now, there would be new and different lines of inquiry than back then. He said, "I would definitely say though that the greatest chance of solving this case lies in forensics. But in those days all they had to go on was blood groups. There was no DNA. This was a frenzied attack, so there must have been blood all over the house, but it's possible not all of that blood is the victim's. Miss Armstrong had defense wounds, which is very significant. She clearly put up a fight, and it's a possibility she caused her attacker to bleed. Blood swabs could have been taken. If they had been preserved, you might be able to get the killer's DNA from them now. The problem is, if there is blood scattered all over the place, you can't take samples of every single spot, and back then they would have had no idea what was coming in terms of forensic science. These days there would also be a forensic examination of the stockings where the murderer would have held them." End of quote. And basically this is everything that we know on the Newcastle Halloween murder. So let's talk about theories. Katherine was a church-going lady who lived through 2 world wars only to have her life taken in such a horrific way, in a senseless crime. It's almost a forgotten case, and quite honestly it's sad. Katherine wasn't assaulted and her clothing were not disturbed, so a motive kind of, seems unlikely. I mean, if an offender has assault as a motive, they would commit that assault regardless. There were also no signs of ransacking and nothing was taken away, so robbery maybe is also unlikely. It is possible though that the initial motive could have been a robbery. Blood was found throughout the house, so this could suggest at least some search of the house made by the killer, or killers possibly looking for something. Katherine was last seen alive at 6:30 p.m. by 2 children passing her house who claimed that she was looking out of the window. She didn't make it to choir practice 1 hour later. Was she already dead by that time? It could be possible, but then it would have been a very, very small window of opportunity. She was seen at 6:30 p.m. but she was only discovered the next morning, so we have no idea if she was dead by the time she was meant to be at church. We don't know how old the children who saw her were. By some reports they were teenagers, but again it's not 100% sure. Is it possible that they had something to do with it? Maybe they were walking by the house to check that she was at home and they then reported back to someone else that then went to attack Katherine. Could the murder have begun as a Halloween prank or maybe a burglary, and the killing was committed by a youth, or more likely youths? The night of Katherine's murder was Halloween. It's dark quite early and there would have been children and teenagers out trick-or-treating and generally up to no good. Could some teenagers had knocked on the door trying to scare an elderly woman as a Halloween prank? They forced their way in and then killed her in, the heat of a struggle maybe, when she attempted to fight back. I mean, Katherine was a strong, stern woman and had the type of character that would have been instilled in a headmistress of the time. She would have been the exact type to discipline someone and tell them exactly what she thought of them. Could a student from when she was a headmistress had done this? Maybe they had something against her, maybe she did something to them while she was still working at the school. Could this have been revenge? Or what if Katherine actually stumbled upon someone trying to take advantage of the early darkness and rob her? Maybe she challenged them and instead of the person or people fleeing the scene, this instead made them angrier. But then why don't just flee? It's very much possible that Katherine knew her killer or killers. Maybe it's a stronger possibility that it was someone from her school, an ex-student. A lot of people believe that there is more than one killer involved, and it could be true. There is still no clear motive, but why the overkill? Why do you stab someone 28 times around the face and neck and then strangle them? It kind of feels personal in a fit of rage moment, or maybe more than one person acting either through fear, peer pressure, or just arrogance, so that each of them kind of equally share the responsibility. It seems like there are two methods of killing to this murder. Could this mean that there was more than one killer? Maybe there was experimentation involved, someone doing it for the first time. Maybe they were trying to strangle her with a sock. That didn't work, and then they stabbed her to make sure that she dies. The murder weapon was never found, but what if the murder weapon was never disposed of? Teenagers usually carry knives as a status symbol, so what if the killer took the knife with them and kept the knife? I think that the killers were from the local area and they either knew or knew of Katherine. No one was seen leaving the area in a panic or rushing. But then again, you know, it was Halloween. There would have been people out on the streets at that time, children trick-or-treating, so it wouldn't really seem out of place either way. But whoever it was, I think that they knew the area well enough to know exactly how and where to make a quick escape without drawing attention to themselves. They had to know that an elderly woman lived alone in that house and that there was no likelihood of breaking in to be confronted by a strong young person. This person or people, it's very likely that they had come to police attention previously, maybe as a youth offender. This killer definitely offended before, in my opinion, because of the violence of this crime. If evidence from the crime scene in 1963 is still in storage, then it's possible that DNA from the killer may be obtained. If not from an exact match, then maybe through a possible family DNA match. Due to the large passage of time, however, if the killer or killers are still alive today, maybe coming to the end of their own life, maybe in a hospital or a care home, or maybe they even died by now and managed to escape justice for Katherine's murder. Somebody must have known who killed Katherine Lillian Armstrong, but never said. Why? Was it out of fear or guilt? Please do let me know, guys, what do you think in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for staying with me and watching today's video. If you are interested in any of the makeup that I used for my look today, all the products are linked in the description down below. Thank you again so much. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!